Buongiorno a tutti, come sapete.
Good morning. Hello. And I'd just like to say that this morning we're going to be speaking with the conference. This meeting is going to be in Italian, and we do actually have interpretation from Italian into English, but otherwise, if we need any other languages, I'm very happy to interpret from Santiago, Sierra, and then you might have some questions, perhaps, and I'm quite happy to do that, too, if you have questions to the panel. Now, I would just like to tell you about this meeting, and I would like to talk about my experience and the background, because I'd like to link up with yesterday and today, and not talk about the situation in the 60s and 70s. Why do we want to put ourselves in this context? And it seems to me that this document represents it represents a situation of the post-war period. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'd like to say that in our generation, which is that of after the Second World War, we have experienced a kind of meeting between realism and abstraction, to put it in those terms. So what we're seeing today now, with regard to the Documenta, is a question of the realism, the war, the massacres, the subjects of book burning from the Nazis, from torture and by the Cambodians, and there's also a parallel discourse which is that of considering art not as an illustration of politics, but politics itself in the linguistic sense, politics. So really it's a way of illustrating events, the tragic events of war, which very much affected the national states. And so it's a question of realism, which is not Beckman, it's not realism in that sense, but it is realism illustrating these other events. And it is also a political discussion making use of the language of art. And so talking about Jannis and Sierra, and also by Gilberto, I'd just like to say that if we look at them not as illustrating politics, not as making sure that the content of their work is a narration of political events, whether it's in Cambodia or whether it's tortured children, whether it's in Asia, whether it's narrating the events of war, but it is the language of art. How can we conciliate, how can we reconcile the political aspect with the language of art? So I'd like to put this question to you, and perhaps you might like to start. Well, I think that politics is an area, and I don't think I am very concerned about what is going on around us. And I think that which is being caused by capitalism. But I engage in art, political practice. I do not consider it as that. I consider it as the fact that art refers to war, it alludes to war, it is concerned with events around. And if we think about war, that's a question of trying to kill as many people as possible. And I think that we are almost on the edge of an abyss, a chasm. And I feel when I'm in that kind of situation, I wasn't a guest, but I was here, and I felt that if we're looking at the orchestra of the Titanic when we saw that, I feel that that art gives rise to that kind of sensation. It is it's a practice which I feel it makes us face up to a situation, to reality, which is really terrible. It's really dreadful. It really is appalling. We could talk about, well, what do you think? Do you think that there are situations of extreme decadence? Our culture is declining, is becoming decadent? Well, yes, is the answer. Yes, because I've been all around the world, and I think that I feel that this culture is coming to an end. For example, I could talk about the Taliban. Well, yes, but we could talk about the situation in Spain. We are a protectorate. We are a protectorate, and the political decisions are not taken in Spain. They are taken in Wall Street, in the Pentagon, or in Frankfurt. And the political and cultural elite is not one who has the idea of collaborating, and they are responsible for all the crimes which have undertaken at all levels, even including the highest line. And the population is really in a kind of dream state until now. If we look at the situation and the way it affects the population, I think we still have to go back to the situation of the end of the 40s and 50s. If we look at the situation, there's Spain, if you look at Syria, you look at Libya, you look at all the situations, it's really the same in all these countries. In Greece, if we talk about that, look at Italy now, and many other countries which affect the fascists. We call them the pigs, of course. We call them. But we're not pigs. Pigs are the people who call us the pigs. Do you reflect in your work this kind of idea? Well, example, if you look at the way in which people are thrown against the wall, and if you look at in Iceland, when the government, in fact, violates the rights of the peoples, well, this was what happened there. And Iceland and Reykjavik, they actually brought down the government, and they accepted this as a kind of tribute to the government. But we've got to look at the way in which we react with other artists. It's no longer art, it's propaganda or counter-propaganda. And I think that we have got to increase the intensity of this clash, because I feel it is not sustainable. Thank you. What about you? We've got to increase the intensity of the conflict, I feel. Do you want to say something?
No, the
problem is that if we arose in the 60s, that was the beginning of period of activity, and it was a period which was highly politicized, and it was very idealized. There was a lot of ideologies as well. But I have to say that the interests of the language predominated. So it isn't so much the documentation of the catastrophes, really, but it was to have a language, mobility in space, and to be able to offer these moral indications without being dogmatic. because we're trying to get out of this square, thinking outside the box, in other words. It was ideological, but not only ideological. It was also, how shall I put it, a linguistic indication and one of the dramaturgy of the setting up a stage for our work, which was extremely interesting. And this, I think, brings me to another point. That is, thinking outside the box, getting out of the box. How can we manage to get to meet others? How can we meet others? How can we have that mobility, the mobility to be able to give to Southeast Asia, to other countries, to everywhere, to be in contact with them without the initiatic meeting, the rite of passage, if you like, without entering into the other side, that is, to move towards the others, to be ready to understand who is the other, and that the other may well be right, and may well be right. And this is right in dialectic terms, that is, to move towards the other with the hope that this meeting will give rise to a third position. And I think that this was the same everywhere. So what was our initiative point of departure was ideological initiation, if you like, and then it was a move towards unknown love, that is, moving towards the other, and that this was the initiator of the idea of moving out from the square, and is extremely important then as it is now. And faced with other artistic experiences of the time, for example, minimalism. But as time goes on, it seems to us, it seems to be dogmatic, and that we are the ones who are opening the doors to freedom, that we are the ones who are showing the libertarian values, and we are moving in a humanistic direction towards infinity, and that we have given to the stage, on the stage of a vast discourse. What we are contributing is that tradition which, like Titian's Madonna, is a fundamental example. Thank you.
No, sto pensando anche a Masaccio, scusami. Sto pensando anche a Masaccio.
I was thinking about Masaccio too.
Sì, sì.
Well, I think it was worthwhile becoming Italian, if only for that, in fact. Well, I agree with both of you. Because from the 60s onward, I think there have been physical movements, one could say, very important movements, not always understood, but as I see it, always perceived, although not always understood. Now, each historical period leaves negative waste or negative spin-off. And as Kounellis has said, leaving the box or leaving the framework, acting outside the framework, I don't know whether that was understood as a gesture of liberty, of freedom, whether we were understood as a force saying, here we are ready to enter into dialogue. I think a lot has to do with perception of the other and what happens around that perception of the other. In Italy at the time, there were just two channels on Italian television, first and second channels. You saw some very strange things, rather strange images or bizarre images. They seemed rather bizarre at the time. For example, at the end of colonialization, when at last Algeria, at least formally, threw off the yoke of the French military forces, but of course it still suffered the influence of the French in terms of French industry, commerce and the like. But a lot of things were disguised or covered up deliberately, and I think perhaps we weren't totally aware of that. I was, of course, very young at the time. I was 18, but I understood that everything was in the move, everything was in flux. In terms of communications, for example, the way messages were being put across, rather anomalous messages being communicated at the time. It wasn't possible, for example, to understand why you have the work of an artist. I mean, Paolini comes to mind, who was producing very simple works of art at the time. It wasn't understood, but I think it was perceived to be a very important, liberating moment in history, and I think that really served us all. I'm sorry, I'm talking about perception or perceiving all the time, perhaps overusing the term or overworking the term, but I think it is important. And I think the discourse goes on, because we must beware, as Santiago was saying, that we don't find ourselves precipitated into the abyss. I think we are at the brink of an abyss or a chasm, and I think we need to be careful. Perhaps I can give you an example. Some 18 years ago exactly, I was in Australia for an exhibition, a wonderful, fine exhibition that I liked very much. And I discovered, when talking with the curator in a museum, she was Scottish and she had arrived in Australia to work within the museum, but she just absolutely went head over heels in love with this of Aborigine as a culture. And she showed me some works that were exhibited in museums throughout Sydney, and she showed me some extraordinary works of art that had been produced by Australian Aborigines. I was really struck, and she understood that I was perceiving the fact that I wasn't in a position to communicate directly with these works. At the same time, I was able to perceive them, and she confirmed that for the natives, the indigenous people, it wasn't important to be understood, but it was important that someone out there perceived them, such as myself. And that procured a very strong emotion on my part. The fact of perceiving something shows that politics is the fruit of disaster, but also our dreams. I think what we need to do is dream more, without that, for all that, becoming dogma. And I think it's important to show that you sacrifice a part of yourself, or you need to sacrifice a part of yourself, with a view to arriving at a more general vision, a more sort of intimate, profound. I think you've got to dig down or delve down in order to emerge once again. I think if you do that, you understand more. Sorry, it sounds a bit like a sermon, so I'll stop there.
Sì, bueno, si è parlato di dogma, si è parlato
Well, we've talked about dogma means or communication.
De quell'ambiente che esisteva a Torino, no? Quando arrivavano tutti i laboratori agli anni 70 di tutta l'Italia.
You talked about Turin, the workers, some industrial relations in the 60s or 50s and 60s. And you talked about the energy that represented the arrival, mass arrival of these workers in places like Turin at the time. But everything that I've seen in the space of my own life, when I've worked in Mexico, Guatemala, we seem to have sort of lost sight of what you were saying. I think we're talking about people who are just being exploited. Or if they're lucky, you get some firmer foot in terms of the world of work, a firmer footing, but you're caught up in a huge machinery. I think in terms of a cancer, seeing the whole thing as a cancer, I think we're seeing the metastases. Talking as artists, engaging in art, is rather similar to sort of dogs barking. But I am doing what I'm doing because I think we need to find solutions. What else can I do? I prefer to do what's known as art, or what goes by the name as art. With the idea of barking or shouting out certain truths, spelling out certain home truths.
Io penso che da questo
There seems to be a lot of noise in the room, says the speaker. If we look at this whole panorama, exhibitions, talk of politics, on political discourse, I think what we need is the sort of the assassination of Marat, the famous painting by David. Because when you see it, you understand the political power of Mademoiselle d'Avignon. And in the absence of that, you're talking about political pathos and its administration. These major exhibitions, such as Documenta, for example, where you have a wealth of different opinions, but in fact nothing actually is produced. And I don't think we really acknowledge the protagonism which is that of the artist in society. I think a lot of artists have been very critical of Documenta. It's the sort of the spectacle side of it. But if I've correctly understood, I think there may well be an alternative. As Jannis was saying, or Santiago, I think what you need to do is go out and encounter the other, rather than, Documenta being in one fixed place or premise. I think what we need to do is really invert that relationship and establish some kind of network. In other words, establish a system of broader contacts. And that, to my mind, is the real alternative when it comes to taking out what we have to say, rather than this the circus, the artistic circus, the exhibitions, the trade fairs, Documenta and the like. I think what we can do as artists is attempt to go out into various fora, various places or spaces. As a curator recently, in these 8 exhibitions in 7 Arte Povera cities throughout Italy, all different, very different cities. I think it was one way of recreating the history of a movement, but at the same time, it was a way of contextualizing it. And rather having the big exhibition put on in Turin and Milan, it was a way of going out and transporting energy elsewhere. So we're talking about networking, but not kind of IT networking, but an experiential, physical, direct form of networking. We're not talking about reproduction or sort of documentation or a documentary approach. I mean, it's very glamour, it's very cool at the moment. But as Jannis was saying, that's the journalistic side of art, if you like. I mean, it's very informative, it's using very seductive media and the like, but in terms of the intensity of the relationship, that is lost. We lose that somewhere. Santiago, you talk about trying to enlarge what you're doing and taking it out into a larger forum.
La prensa commerciale o la prensa che esisteva prima, questi giornalisti meravigliosi che tutte le settimane cercavano di leggere.
You get the journalists writing their reviews regularly.
Stanno dicendo tutto quello che stanno dicendo non è vero, o grandissima parte di quello che dicono, stanno tentando di manipolare.
A lot of what's said, of course, isn't true or doesn't bear any real relationship to the truth. It's a distortion. And I think artists really need to recuperate that, or recover that truth.
Ha recuperato per sé questa idea di informazione, di informare di quello che sta succedendo.
And I think we need to recuperate that role of informing.
Che io non lo considero un documentario perché è un po' è una epopeia, una road movie epopeia, no? Che era ho fatto una grandissima 2 lettere con la N e la O, no.
I produced 2 letters, N and O. On the side of a lorry, we've traveled widely. I think it's what you're talking about, networking. And we went out to areas where art's very much present and areas where it isn't at all. Pentagon, Wall Street, but also residential centres with this lorry, this giant NO letters on the side. And in the last stages, we went to visit the Pope in the Vatican when he was in Madrid. It was extremely hot as a result of social front, industrial relations, not only the weather. And there were millions of pilgrims putting on a show of strength. We said we don't have to, our message was you don't have to accept the current sort of political approach, nationalism, Catholicism, Franco, Mussolini and the like. There is an alternative. And there's a friend of mine from Germany who's come up with a fulgurator. It's, rather than photographing, it projects like a sort of a flash of light on a given surface, and it is activated when other cameras start clicking around it. And it projected light onto these giant letters NO, and that is an event that we staged during the major youth gathering around the Pope in Madrid. So we had this light flashing on our giant letters NO. So I think it's one way of saying no. I think the only thing you can say to power is no.
Right. I'd just like to tell you about, you're talking about increasing contacts, and you were trying to saying that you want that this, you've had contact with people, with the public in China, and that this gives rise to a generous exchange, and it creates a different kind of relation, as you which is what you're looking for. You're seeking that, which is kind of extending the territorial limits, if you like. Well, no, I'm not looking for anything. But of course, it is attractive. I do attract this. And there is this whole question of attraction, and this is what happens. People and their diversity, which, well, they're offering this diversity. And then in this diversity, we also find social condition. You find everything in moments such as this one, which is a kind of discussion. We've got very rich people, but also very poor people here meeting. So this is as if this is something which has always existed. And Carlo Levi, who wrote Christ stopped at Eboli, and this Christ, who is this Christ who stopped at Eboli? Well, Eboli is very near in the south, in a period of war. But no, you see, I don't think that this is something which is. It's not something which is quite normal. I think if it's actually rather exceptional. If you think about it carefully, this Christ stopped. He stopped at Eboli, the title of his book. And if you think about the critics of the market, well, this, I think, is an indication, a very dramatic indication of existence, and also it puts the finger on a kind of morality, because I think that what should accompany the artist, and this is something that should not escape the artist. And really, the bottom line is the moral aspect. That is my view.
Niente? No.
Did you want to say something, or, well, okay. I have to say I totally agree, but in a different way. Because I agree because it is true. It's true that Gianni, well, he is an authentic world traveler. He is someone who's goes around. I mean, he goes around the world and looks as well at the future. I'm not anything like a world traveler as he is, but what he has to say is very true and very interesting, of course. But if we're talking about this meeting with diversity, this encounter with diversity, well, I think of it as a kind of addition is something which, of course, is a source of wealth. It's a source of great. It adds to what we have. Santiago was talking about what he intervenes and the way in which he intervened. I believe it was to do with the Pope and his intervention concerning the Pope. But this is also a way of acting on diversity, which is being suggested. But in my work, I would like to say, my work is much less of a world of work which covers the world than that of Giovanni, of course. But I have to say, I'd like to tell you about two very important experiences that I've had for me. So one was in Bologna and one was in Santiago di Compostela, where in Bologna, we were assembling my grammatics, my grammar, if you like, the grammar of my work. At the same time, we were involved in a sort of mentality, in a very strong strong artistic position. But then this work was transferred to Santiago de Compostela, which is a city of miracles, there where you breathe in a completely mad, a crazy atmosphere, if you like, because there is the idea of creating a museum of contemporary art in such a place where you have got photographs, where you've got museum and pictures of Franco. Well, this was such an amazing atmosphere, and well, I felt that you had to really absorb the very diverse, the great diversity of this particular special place, of the sacred, combined with the different images, say, pictures of Franco and others. This all had to be absorbed into my work, and this really gives it a different impact, because if you think it does have an effect on it, the social atmosphere, the searching for materials, the way in which you walk in the street, the air you breathe. This is very different, and this does have an impact on the work, and this is part of it. There's a tremendous contrast, because if you look at it, there are 40 churches, chapels, and so on. But there are also 40 nightclubs. You can't just exclude them as well. And so, it is completely in a completely crazy atmosphere. But this is the world. It is the world. The only thing that obtained was the two exhibitions. There was some of my older work in these exhibitions, and some recent ones as well, but they also had links with other international exhibitions, and also with an electric guitar, and the music was started every few minutes or so, and I found it very boring. But I mean, the public seemed to like it. The public of Santiago were looking around, and they were listening to the music as well, and it was I thought it was very funny. I like to contribute old works and to put them in a contemporary background. And in my particular area, I have to say, in my small area, I have to say that the function of art, I think, is also to trigger the desire to question it. What is it? What is it? Why is this person doing this? Why is this artist doing this? I like to look at these. I like to look at the changes and sometimes the clashes, the positive and negative aspects as well. And you don't want the people to shoot at it. You don't want them to take out a gun and shoot at them. Santiago was the president of the nation, was that right? Of the state? What's his name? President of the Vatican. Vatican? No, it wasn't the Vatican, no. Santiago de Compostela. Galicia. I'm so sorry. I couldn't remember. Yes. I couldn't remember now. And I think that they were the head of that particular region was very confused and in fact left. Well, in Spain, everything that was called the transition, in fact, has been a complete window dressing, because all the Franquist sympathies are still there. No statues have crumbled. We haven't seen any questioning. There's been no courts, such as there was in Nuremberg. A lot of the people have been educated in the Franquist tradition, and this is a continuity. And I think that this is really, as I say, window dressing. It's a mask. And we're very happy to tear off the mask and to show what lies behind it. But your experience that you were talking about in Santiago I don't think it should make you think bad about Galicia, that part of Spain, because they've always had a very strong combative element. And so I think this is very interesting. Well, I'm not so happy, but I think that they're very free, very free. I was very happy to be there.
Perhaps I could just underscore one thing. While you were talking, there's something that came to mind, and that is that the type of work that you're engaged in, that you're still producing, isn't rigid, is not fixed. I think it's subtle, it's flexible. So it's possible for it to be adapted rather than coming up with a ready-made good or a sort of ready sort of manufactured finished product, either as a sort of painting, a sculpture and so on, but rather you're adapting to the situation, basically. You're reacting to the context, you're absorbing that context. Jannis was talking about his travels, and he sleeps in the space where he's exhibiting in order to absorb the atmosphere almost, or Gilberto. But there is this need, it would seem, to work as an effective and emotional sponge or ideological, political, contextual sponge and soak up the environment. It's not as if the work of art doesn't adapt to context. It's performative to a certain extent. It's part organically of the area where it's being exhibited, politically, linguistically, architectonically. So it's just a new reading of the same work, of that work, although, as Gilberto said, he takes his old work in a recent context and it's adapted to a different stage. It's changed. It undergoes some kind of change. Well, it isn't old. In fact, it isn't old. You can't talk about older work. It isn't old. I think weight has been of considerable importance as far as our work is concerned. I started with a quintal of coal in a corner of a room. Now, as of a quintal of coal. It's not material. That's not how I see it. It's something that polarizes the space around it. You can put it inside a church, your quintal of coal, it'll polarize that church. You put it in a public room, or then it polarizes attention in that room. And of course, you can't force any individual to carry along sort of a quintal of coal and exhibit it in their bedroom. That's not possible. So there is that element that is fundamental, as I was saying, the element of weight, the discovery of weight. And that weight is indicative of a certain morality. There's no paper inside it. It is just a quintal of coal, and you have to see it as such. To tell you the truth, I haven't really moved far or moved on very much from that, but that's enough for me. That's enough for me to be able to travel everywhere or anywhere. Yes, my experience is similar to what you're just recounting, Spade. There's an exhibition here. Bregenz, is it? Bregenz? 4 floors, and on the last floor, we put some concrete. In fact, enough. Almost enough to bring down the other floors. We had to control the whole thing very carefully with the sort of cables supporting the weight, this huge weight.
Ha stato una vita molto tempo fa, molto insicura per la guerra, eccetera, però che adesso qualche minima insegurità causa come una coscienza che va
change could jeopardize the whole building. I mean, it's survived warfare and the like, but the building is particularly fragile. And I think what I like about that is that we're living with fragility, where you have to weigh very carefully the concrete that you're using to ensure that it doesn't demolish the entire edifice. What about weight? Are you a bit lighter than us?
No, ma perché è già un confine.
Well, I think it is a confine or a limit, a weight. It's a confine limit between something that's virtual and something that is there in terms of its weight. It takes on an undeniable reality as a result of the weight.
Adesso io penso alla nostra generazione.
Well, I'm thinking about our generation.
Artisti che sono completamente fuori mercato,
Artists who are isolated, not really in the marketplace.
Una roccia di 400 tonnellate.
And we moved a rock of sort of 400 tons, exhibiting it in a museum. That was done recently, but that's a kind of project that we were talking about some sort of 40, 50 years ago.
Ha continuato questa idea di una moralità che non si tocca, che ha
So I think there's still this element of the moral element that is untouchable. The idea of an energy that can move mountains. So I think symbolically that is important. So we're seeing efforts today based on the work that we did some 40, 50 years ago, rather like a pyramid, if you like. I mean, we shouldn't forget what's going on in the US. It's not just us Europeans. But I think we've got to look in the longer term when talking about the history of art. I mean, coal goes back 2,000 years. I mean, I recall a discussion, Mel Botner, during a debate, we were talking about minimalism, Arte Povera, and at a certain point in time, and in order to communicate the differences or get across the differences between the Europeans and the Americans, he went like this: for you, that's 2 foot. For me, it's 2,000 years.
Quindi dicevo, non siamo solo una generazione che considera
we're talking about a generation that had an interest in the history of materials. I think for me, Gilberto, we've got a political education. We've had a political education. I mean, I've been talking about coal. It's not the geophysicists who are important when talking about coal. If you look at the writings of Victor Hugo, for example, where coal really is an important element. Rather like the Van Gogh sort of potato sort of peelers. I mean, the whole scene being depicted is one of poverty. Well, more than poverty, we're talking about the basic human condition. There's a closeness or proximity to coal, to mining. So we're not talking about a geophysical condition when talking about coal. We're talking about a social, historical condition when talking about materials such as coal. Well, it's 11 o'clock. I'm a Swiss moderator, so perhaps at this point I could now open the discussion to the public if there are any questions. Otherwise, we can continue chatting here for hours to come. That's quite clear, but if there are any questions... Well, sorry, but you'll have to sit here if we go on chatting for hours. Perhaps I can just say one thing. I'd just like to recount a sort of a little story or an anecdote about coal or weight and youth. In '69, we had at the ICA in London, there was an exhibition put on, and when there were very boring customs formalities you had to get through, and I decided to transport my work audio, with a huge lead block with the words audio written across it. We wanted to get it to London, but we didn't got time to organize the transport. So I modified a sort of school satchel in leather, and I carried some 50 kilos up the little gangplank into the aircraft. And it's terrible memories for me, because people didn't believe it when, of course, I opened this little leather satchel containing this 50 kilo lead weight. But I mean, I virtually pulled my arms off, and I understood the weight of audio hatred. I had a real physical sense of how much hatred weighs in the balance. And it's not just a joke, it's not just an anecdote. I think it's what happened. It's an event that occurred. But I think what Jannis is saying is absolutely right. He's spot on. I think we're talking about liberating energy. That have not so much to do with symbols or tautology, but we're talking about something that reflects or represents a new reality, the space that is actually occupied. We're not talking about sort of wall coverings. We're talking about. In fact, Anselmo, I think, also had that huge block of coal. In fact, that I think he bought in Genoa the first time round, with a light bulb, and said, in, say, quarter of a billion years, we'll return to what everything was, fluid, liquid, i.e. trying to get across the notion of time, which is dangerously stimulating, but I think ultimately rather dangerous, because I think it drags into a false sense of illusion. Any questions out there?
La posso fare in inglese?
Can I put my question in English?
Okay. Because you talk a lot like about the perception of your works, like this idea of polarization of Kounellis, and of like this coal is different if you put it in a bedroom and in a church or whatever. And I would like to ask, like, what do you think of like these conditions of like how work is viewed in relationship with like precisely the Art Basel? Because I don't really know, because it's the first time I come, but I see a lot of presence of...
I have to translate, okay? I have to translate, one sec. Allora, la domanda è, rispetto a questa forza polarizzante del vostro tipo di materiale, siccome lui è la prima volta che viene a Basel, come si relaziona rispetto a una condizione invece tipica di una fiera? Che tipo di polarizzazione stabilisce il lavoro quando entra in un giro di mercato? You can continue.
Sì, perché, because there's also like a lot of presence of like this kind of artists, like Jannis, of course, but also like Luciano Fabro, Anselmo, and the ideas that come with this like exposure, do they lose strength? And is this also kind of related with what Sierra was saying about this titanic orchestra, like of these years?
Se perdono energia in un contesto, Giovanni, Luciano e così via, che è quello del mercato.
A me?
O come
no,
volete.
A tutti.
Gil?
No.
No, non l'ha fatto lui, no. Sto parlando con te. No, non perdo.
Va bene. No, ma non so, tempo fa, all'epoca della traccia avanguardia,
some time ago,
ho sentito,
I heard it said that someone was saying Now, the color is red, and painters have got to paint red. That was at the avant-garde period. And this means a kind of the market dictates, that the market wills it, but it's not true that the market is the only element, because otherwise the Demoiselle d'Avignon would not have, no one would have wanted it. So if you've got a quintal of coal, there was but no possibility at all of changing it and to buy it. But that is, of course, a market as well. But it's not. It doesn't actually correspond to the initial desire, because somebody will probably want to buy it, despite the fact that it might be rather scandalous, or it might appear rather scandalous.
Each of the panelists gave a very interesting description of a work that they felt was perhaps somewhere near the Marat Mort that Jannis Kounellis mentioned. But Santiago, so you mentioned that journalists distort interpretations of work. And I'm wondering if perhaps the panelists could say something a bit more positive about art critics and art historians and their role in the political dissemination of work.
I don't catch your question.
Allora, la domanda è, c'è una tua dichiarazione sugli storici e i giornalisti dell'arte che danno una cattiva interpretazione. Lui ti chiede se ci sono degli aspetti positivi anche da parte degli storici dell'arte o dei critici, non solo un aspetto negativo. Tu parlavi di giornalismo in generale, non giornalismo dell'arte, giusto?
No, parlo di giornalismo normale.
Well, I was talking about ordinary journalism.
I'm talking about the commercial journalism, no? I'm not talking about the independent media, which are the blogs, all the things in internet I'm making that I like a lot. Is my source of information, no? And I appreciate that. And about the story of art, and if I understand well, you said that I have a very negative vision about the story of art. That's what you say? No, what I don't have is a neutral vision. So I think if you go, for example, to El Prado Museum, everybody likes El Prado Museum, but what you have there is a collection done by psychopaths, no, what you say, by really crazy people, no? It's full of, for example, images of, I remember Saturn eating the sun, or prosecutions of ladies with dogs in the middle of the fields. This kind of images is what you have in El Prado Museum. What I'm not going to say is that all the history of art is lovely. The history of art reflects in many ways the conditions of the different times, no? The different moments of the history, and we don't have a beautiful history, no? There is some parts that are beautiful, but not all of them. So I'm not clap hands about all the history of art, no?
Volevo chiedervi se sarebbe condivisibile
Can I ask you
dell'attualità del concetto di arte povera del vostro lavoro che nasce
whether,
40 anni fa.
I mean, Arte Povera as a concept emerged some 40 years ago. I wonder whether you'd like now to look at what's going on in the current world, the financial economy, the real economy, the rediscovery of a certain type of relating to reality, which underpins the original concept. I wonder whether you could draw from that and comment on the contemporary world. Do you have anything to say about that?
No. Parlo del mio lavoro,
Well, I'll speak about my own work.
Per cui non mi sgridate.
So don't shut me down.
Io credo che
I think my work can be modified by the economy, but not changed. It can't be masked or disguised. And I think I can say that of the work of so many artists. It can't be sort of masked or hidden or disguised. And that, I think, is a very positive fact. I mean, you can physically destroy a work of art. You can try and affect its intrinsic strength as a result of the context in which it's exhibited, but I don't think you can actually change it. So it has its own autonomy. It exists as an interrogation, as a question, and will exist as long as there is physical life. So it's very difficult for me to give you any scientific, in inverted commas, reply to the question that you've raised. But I don't think really, ultimately, the economy really has much to do with it. My work is not part of the room and the web of sort of economic designs or things that are undertaken at an economic level. If we look back to sort of the 66, when you had a certain social, political, economic climate, it doesn't mean that it's not relevant today because the economy has changed. In fact, I don't think it matters at all. It doesn't for me, anyway. I mean, I don't like it when I see the work of my colleagues and my own work transformed somehow because an attempt is being made to try and insert it into, let's say, sort of premise X in manner Y. I think they just need to be left as they are, so that it can be seen, viewed, and that's it. I don't think they should become objects of negotiations, transactions, economic transactions, because it wouldn't work anyway. I mean, these are ideas that would take some time to discuss, or rather far-reaching, and I'm not in a position to just reduce it to its essential core. I mean, there have been negative examples of the past, present, and there will be in the future. When I go and see works, I don't ask, what the price is when I go to trade fairs or to see Sierra's work. I mean, I don't go and ask what's the price, what's the sort of the price ticket on it. I'm just happy to go along and see works of art such as those of Sierra. I mean, this Art Basel is, of course, is a very high level. There are others which are not of the same standing, obviously.
Io direi molto vicino a lui, naturalmente.
Well, I think our position is very close one to the other, obviously. In the 60s, on a sheet of metal, steel,
che è la dimensione di una carta Fabriano, ho scritto sopra,
I wrote on it
con il gesso,
in chalk,
libertà o morte,
freedom or death, long live Marat, long live Robespierre.
Per dire che non ho pensato il mercato in senso.
So I wasn't thinking in terms of the market when I did that.
Pensavo però al ruolo di un
But I was thinking
intellettuale che dipinge.
Of the role of an intellectual who paints.
Questo sì.
That, yes.
Non posso cambiare. E penso
and I can't really change that. I think that's the future
appunto anche la cosa
for art or artists.
Dell'assassinato Marat di David.
I mean, thinking back to David's assassination of Marat.
Che mi eccitano la fantasia.
It gets my imagination going.
Di David
when I think of
Marat.
David's painting.
Anche un altro quadro di
so I had that in mind, of course, and then there's a painting by Corot, which is the beginning of the world. Oh no, you're talking about the origin of the world.
E io penso che sia questo quadro lì sia veramente
And I think that is truly revolutionary, and it's as of that point that modernity begins.
la modernità,
It's then that modernity starts for me.
L'estremo passato, la lingua,
A break with the past.
Il resto è che c'è un'economia nell'arte.
Introduction of language.
Lo so che c'è perché vivo
But when it comes to the economy of
non
art,
è
I mean, I
che
live on
mi
it, so I know it's
interessa,
there, but it's not that it really interests me very much at all.
Bene, grazie. Grazie sempre.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Togliamo via questa...